Houston Real Estate Radio.
Thanks for tuning in to Houston Real Estate Radio, where we bring you guests and information you can use in your next real estate transaction. If you have a real estate question, you can call in anytime, and that number is 281-882-8088. You can also tweet us your questions. You can use hashtag HRER, and we'll answer those for you. I'm Shannon Register, and I'm joined by Dr. Jim Gaines from the Real Estate Research Center at Texas A&M University, and we've been discussing some of the issues in Houston and our economy. We're said to be kind of the Texas miracle here in Houston, and we're outshining the rest of the country, which is very exciting, very good news. But the question is that going to last? Do we have the infrastructure here in our Houston area to keep up with this influx of people coming to our area and all the job growth that's going on?
Well, I think so.
We hope so, right?
The other way to ask it is sort of what's the downside risk for Houston right now? Things are going very well. We're adding. The Census Bureau came out just not long ago and reported that from April of 2010 to July 1 of 2011, Harris County added nearly 90,000 people in 1 year.
That's a lot of people.
It was the fastest growing county in terms of count of head count in the country. And something like 12 of the top 25 counties in the country were in Texas. All of the major counties in Texas were in those top counties. So you would say, okay, everything's going so well and we're moving in the right direction. What's our downside risk? Well, our downside risk is like what everybody would imagine. If something happens in the oil and gas industry that slows that down, that would affect us. It is also possible that the nation and the world will go into another recession.
Let's not even talk about that. That would be bad news.
Well, and the odds right now are maybe 20-30% or better.
Really?
That in 2013 we could slide into a recession. The pundits that watch these things that I've been following are watching very closely what's going on with the fiscal cliff. If we go over the cliff with all of the changes that are right now set to happen January 1, the average American household will face an increase in tax liability of about $3,500, almost $300 a month less money to spend.
And that has a big impact on a lot of families.
Yeah, and that's going to be it's going to hit lower income people much harder than upper income, even though the so-called changes are targeted to the upper income. Anyway, the point being that could trigger, be an event that would trigger going and dropping into another recession. I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying it is a very real possibility. At this point, it is one of the downside risks, because if we go into a global national recession, Houston could follow suit as well.
Right. Well, luckily,
we're looking good.
Yeah, we're looking good, and we were the last ones into the recessions and the first ones out, which is good.
Right, exactly.
Good. So this week I attended H-Town with a lot of other realtors here in the Houston area, and that's a program that the Houston Association of Realtors puts on once a year, and they had a really great lineup of speakers, talked about a lot of different things that affect the Houston economy. So want to get your input on some of the things we talked about. Judge Emmett was one of the speakers at H-Town, and he talked about how great our economy is doing, but that we're kind of at that tipping point, and that one of the things that we really need to do is increase our infrastructure as far as our transportation, some of the projects that we need to do to keep us from getting stagnant in the future, from kind of stagnating later on, kind of future predictions. He was saying that we need to kind of reposition Houston to make sure that we can continue our growth in the future. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that medium and long-term issue, the biggest one in Houston, it's been this way probably for the last 30, 40, 50 years, is infrastructure to accommodate the kind of growth that we're experiencing and really have experienced over the last 20, 30 years. So the judge is obviously very, very correct about that. Houston is probably going to grow at least 4 or 5 million people in the next 20 years. That's sort of a minimum. Incidentally, if we grow about, let's say, 5 million people in the next 20 years, that's another nearly 5 million cars and trucks.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Because it runs a very close 1-to-1 ratio, and
Yeah.
and so there's your demand on your infrastructure, on your street infrastructure. Obviously, these people have to live somewhere. They have to work somewhere. There's water sewer demands. Houston has the only topographical problem with Houston is it's flat. And so drainage becomes a problem. When it rains, and particularly if it rains anything hard at all,
Yeah.
where does all this water go and how do we account for it?
Yeah, that
So
flash
all of
flooding.
these issues, and so there is an issue of growth management and being out in front of the curve instead of being behind it in terms of infrastructure development. That's going to include Metro and everything else.
The president and CEO of Metro Transit Authority of Harris County, he spoke at H-Town, and he talked about the expansion going on. And there's 3 different major projects going on in Houston, which is good. I mean, they really are expanding the Metro Rail, and he also talked about how they're adding buses, increasing the bus system. They're bringing some larger buses for areas that accommodate more people. And there's actually something on the ballot in November for voters to think about. That if you agree with what's on the ballot, it's going to increase and redistribute a little bit of their money to help grow the transit as well.
Right, and we've been working. Transit has been an issue in Houston for a long time. Quite frankly, I was working in Houston 25 years ago with Metro, doing consulting and looking at alternative routes. And so it's an ongoing process, and it was always intended to be and expected to be an ongoing process, because those things don't just get put in place and then you forget about them.
Right. Well, and it was more downtown, and now they're looking at bringing it farther north, farther south, really
Exactly.
expanding
There's,
it.
there's the intra-urban mobility issue, and then there's the commuting issue, and then those are all the kind of transportation issues and problems that have to be confronted. Roads are going to be difficult to build because state and counties don't have a whole lot of money for roads. We may see more toll roads. I heard a presentation lately on 149 and those kind of things. Yes, and all these things are good things. They have to be done. Houston is a little bit even behind the curve, quite frankly. If you look at all the major U.S. cities in their urban mobility planning and execution and where they are in stages, Houston is really just getting started with a lot of the intercity mobility projects of mass transit and so forth, and is going to have, but Houston's always had the ability that once they decided to do it, it generally got done. But you got to make that commitment.
We think bigger and move faster here in Texas, right?
It's Texas, right?
You talked a little bit about oil and gas and how the changes going on in the oil and gas industry affect Houston. Do you think that that's still such a huge factor? We used to be kind of counter-cyclical to the rest of the country as far as going into recessions and coming out of recessions and that kind of thing, how our economy works. But now we've got such a variety of industrial jobs going on here. We've got a huge medical center, the port, lots of big employers here that have nothing to do with oil and gas. Do you still think that oil and gas dominates, or do you think that we've reached a point where it's a more balanced economy?
No, it still dominates.
Still oil and gas?
It's still dominant. I mean, everything you say is exactly correct. We do have a huge medical facility. The Port Authority port activity is extremely important. We have other quote-unquote non-energy related industries that have moved to the Houston area and so on. But the bottom line is, when you really analyze it, is that industry, and it's oil, gas, and petrochemicals, the whole complex there, is still a dominant force. Now, is it less dominant than maybe it was 30, 40 years ago? That's probably a little true, because the other areas have grown and diversified us a little bit more than what historically we were. But it's still pretty dominant to the economy.
And the medical center, I mean, we're so blessed here in Houston to have the Texas Medical Center. It's just amazing. offers so much, from childcare up to the elderly. I mean, there's just so
Oh, yeah.
much here.
Well,
The best cancer center. I mean, it's fabulous. Do you think? I mean, I know it impacts a lot because it has a lot of employees, and that's one of the things Metro accommodates as well as
right.
the medical center. With the Obamacare issues that are going to be addressed with the election, do you think that's going to have an impact on Houston's medical center?
Well, I don't see how it couldn't. On the other hand, healthcare isn't going to go away.
Right. And people are always going to be sick.
We're always going to be sick, and incidentally, we're getting more and more people with my color hair. As we get a little older, we require more health care. And yeah, Houston is absolutely blessed to have probably, arguably the world-class health facility in the medical center that's doesn't have to take a second seat to anybody in the world,
Right.
in terms of the quality of health care and the capacity and so forth. And that is a growing area. Now, yeah, really the thing about the Obamacare right now is the uncertainty within it of what's happening and how it's going to work and who's going to do what and what the economic consequences are going to be and so forth. Once it gets ironed out, but unfortunately that may take a while to get ironed out, then we'll have a better or clearer picture of what that impact's going to be. But I think we can expect the medical center to keep progressing. Now, remember, the medical center itself is geographically constrained.
Right.
It's on I've forgotten how many acres it is, but it's about 600 acres or something down there.
It's very large, yeah.
But it's now growing and expanding onto outside for support services, regional campuses, regional hospitals, and so forth, reaching out. And so all of that is going to continue to go. And then the research coordination among the universities is important.
Sure.
We're developing it here at A&M, for example.
What about the Panama Canal? And we're going to have to go to break real shortly. But just a quick question about the Panama Canal. Is that, as it reaches completion, do you think that's going to have a large impact on the Houston economy?
I don't know what you mean by large. I think it will probably have some impact in the sense that the canal will be able to handle more capacity. And by capacity, sheer numbers of ships. But it also, of course, is being expanded to handle bigger, larger vessels that right now I understand is a challenge to the port of Houston in terms of their capacity. And that's how these things generally go. One, you get bigger ships and then you don't have ports, and then you have bigger ports and don't have bigger ships. So my guess is somewhere down the line, we'll figure out how to accommodate that. But immediately, maybe volume would pick up a little bit just from the sheer number of ships that will be able to come through the canal, more than maybe the super tankers coming through.
All right, we're going to be right back after a break. I appreciate your information. You always bring us a lot of great stuff. Appreciate you joining us.
Sure, my pleasure.